The red laser pointer danced across the perfectly manicured lawn like a targeting system, and Elaine Rafferty knew exactly who was behind it. Again. She didn't need to turn around to recognize the silhouette of Linda Pembroke, the neighborhood's most notorious homeowners association enforcer, standing at her property line. The laser meant one thing. Another violation was about to be documented. Elaine took a long sip of her morning coffee, steam rising in delicate wisps that contrasted sharply with the tension brewing outside. 3 months had passed since she'd installed the above-ground pool in her backyard, and those 3 months had been a war of attrition with Linda, whom everyone in Oak Ridge Estates not so affectionately called the HOA Karen. The pool wasn't just any pool. It was a 12-foot round oasis that represented Elaine's first real moment of rebellion after 20 years of corporate compliance. At 45, she finally decided that her meticulously planned life needed something spontaneous, something that defied the endless rows of identical beach houses and perfectly trimmed hedgerows. Linda's laser pointer flickered again, this time illuminating the pool's edge. Elaine knew exactly what infractions were about to be cited. The pool was 3 inches too close to the property line. Its blue tarp cover didn't match the approved desert top color specified in Section 7.3 of the neighborhood bylaws. And most critically, she hadn't submitted the mandatory exterior water feature request form in triplicate. "Good morning, Linda," Elaine called out without turning around, her voice cool and measured. "Beautiful day for enforcing arbitrary rules." The screen door creaked open and Elaine could almost hear Linda's intake of breath. The woman lived for moments like these. Documentation, citation, the bureaucratic thrill of catching someone in technical violation. What Linda didn't know was that Elaine had spent weeks researching every single HOA regulation. She'd become a bylaws ninja, understanding each subclause and minute detail with the precision of a corporate lawyer. This pool wasn't just a purchase, it was a calculated act of suburban defiance. "The pool violates at least 17 separate regulations," Linda announced, her voice carrying the self-righteous tone of someone who believed administrative power was a moral imperative. "I've already photographed the infractions and prepared a formal complaint." Elaine finally turned, her oversized sunglasses reflecting Linda's frustrated expression. 17 exactly? How? Precise of you. What Linda didn't realize was that this confrontation was about to become far more complicated than she could possibly imagine. Elaine had been patient, methodical, and was 3 moves ahead in this suburban chess match. The laser pointer continued its erratic dance across the lawn, a red dot of bureaucratic menace that would soon reveal itself as nothing more than a prelude to a much larger conflict. Oak Ridge Estates had no idea what was coming, and Linda Pembroke was about to learn that not every homeowner would simply submit to her reign of petty administrative terror. Some would fight back, strategically, intelligently, with a smile. The HOA meeting room felt like a battlefield disguised as a community center conference space. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting an institutional glow on rows of uncomfortable chairs filled with Oak Ridge Estate's most passionate rule followers. Linda Pembroke sat front and center, her meticulously organized binder open to a tab marked Pool Violation, Rafferty Residence. Her mechanical pencil, color-coded and precisely sharpened, tapped a rhythmic warning against the laminated agenda. "Item 7, she announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of neighborhood gossip. "Unauthorized pool installation by Elaine Rafferty." Elaine sat near the back, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. She prepared for this moment like a general strategizing a complex military campaign. Around her, neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew Linda's reputation for bureaucratic warfare, but few had ever successfully challenged her. Tom Henderson, the HOA board president, looked distinctly uncomfortable. A retired middle manager who preferred conflict avoidance to actual confrontation, he cleared his throat. "Ms. Pembroke, could you elaborate on the specific violations?" Linda's presentation was a masterpiece of administrative precision. Color-coded photographs, highlighted bylaws, and a 17-point list of infractions cascaded across the projector screen. She traced every possible regulatory angle, from pool placement to potential noise violations, drainage concerns, and even the theoretical impact on property values. "Not only is the pool improperly situated," Linda concluded, her voice dripping with righteous indignation, "but Mrs. Rafferty has systematically ignored multiple written warnings." What Linda didn't know was that Elaine had been collecting her own documentation. Years of corporate legal experience had taught her that the best defense was a meticulously prepared offense. When Elaine finally stood, the room fell silent. Her navy blazer was pressed, her presentation folder color-coded to match Linda's, a subtle psychological chess move. "If we're discussing violations," Elaine began, her voice calm and professional, "I'd like to discuss some interesting discrepancies I've discovered." She clicked through her own presentation. Property survey maps revealed that Linda's beloved Rose Garden, the neighborhood's most celebrated landscaping feature, actually encroached 2 feet onto common area property. Architectural Review Board minutes from 3 years ago showed a series of undocumented modifications to Linda's own home that violated at least 6 separate HOA regulations. The room transformed, whispers became murmurs, murmurs became discussions. Neighbors who had previously cowered under Linda's administrative tyranny now leaned forward, suddenly interested. Tom Henderson's complexion shifted from bureaucratic beige to a concerning shade of pale pink. Linda's mechanical pencil stopped mid-tap, suspended in sudden, horrified silence. Furthermore, Elaine continued, her smile never wavering, "I've prepared a comprehensive report demonstrating that my pool installation meets or exceeds all technical requirements. The 3-inch variance was pre-approved through a grandfather clause in the 2019 bylaws. A detail I'm certain Ms. Pembroke overlooked. The room hung in suspension. Years of neighborhood power dynamics were about to shift. Everyone knew it." Linda's perfectly organized binder slowly, almost dramatically, began to slide from her lap. The aftermath of the HOA meeting spread through Oak Ridge Estates like wildfire. Linda Pembroke's carefully constructed reputation lay in tatters, her administrative armor punctured by Elaine's surgical precision. 3 days after the meeting, Linda decided her next move would require more direct intervention. She'd spent hours reviewing surveillance footage from her home security system, searching for any possible violation she could leverage against Elaine. At precisely 6:42 a.m., Linda marched to her computer and began drafting an email to the local police department. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, each keystroke a weapon in her ongoing battle. Noise ordinance violations, potential safety hazards, unauthorized structural modifications, she would leave no stone unturned. What Linda didn't realize was that her obsessive documentation was about to become her greatest weakness. Across the neighborhood, blinds twitched and garage doors opened slightly as residents watched her performance. The Hendersons from 2 doors down pretended to water their lawn, their sprinklers strategically positioned to give them a clear view of Linda's increasingly frantic movements. The email was a masterpiece of bureaucratic hysteria. She alleged that Elaine's pool represented a clear and present danger to the neighborhood, complete with 5 attached PDF documents, color-coded charts, and annotated photographs. Each paragraph was a carefully constructed argument designed to trigger an official response. At the bottom of the email, Linda added a personal note that would prove to be her undoing. Immediate intervention required. Potential criminal activity detected. By 8:15 a.m., she was on the phone with the local police department, her voice a razor-sharp instrument of complaint. "I need to file a formal report," she told the dispatch officer, her words clipped and precise. "My neighbor has constructed an unauthorized water feature that represents a significant community risk." The dispatch officer, having heard countless HOA-related complaints, listened with the practiced patience of someone who had seen it all. "Ma'am," he interrupted, "can you specify the exact nature of the criminal activity?" Linda hesitated. Her allegations suddenly seemed less concrete when verbalized. "Well, it's a pool. But it's not just a pool. It's a violation of." "Is the pool causing immediate harm?" the officer asked, his tone suggesting he'd heard the story 1,000 times before. What happened next would become neighborhood legend. In her attempt to prove her point, Linda pulled up her surveillance footage, the same footage she'd been reviewing obsessively. But in her haste, she failed to notice a critical detail. The video clearly showed her own repeated trespassing on Elaine's property, laser pointer in hand, measuring and documenting without permission. Multiple times. On recorded camera. The dispatch officer's tone changed. "Ma'am, are you aware that you've documented yourself repeatedly entering private property without consent?" Silence filled the line. Linda's perfectly organized world began to crumble, one digital frame at a time. The neighborhood held its collective breath. Oak Ridge Estates was about to witness a spectacular administrative implosion with Linda Pembroke at the epicenter. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon in a bureaucratic war is one's own overzealous documentation. Officer Mark Rodriguez had seen his share of suburban disputes, but the file on Linda Pembroke was something special. He'd spent the morning reviewing the digital evidence, a treasure trove of self-incriminating surveillance footage that read like a comedy of errors. "You've got to see this," he told his partner, Detective Sarah Chen, sliding the tablet across the cruiser's center console. "This is next-level neighborhood drama." The footage showed Linda Pembroke, clipboard in hand, laser pointer dancing, repeatedly crossing onto Elaine Rafferty's property. Each intrusion was time-stamped, geotagged, and captured in high definition. What had started as a simple pool violation complaint had transformed into a potential criminal trespassing case. At the Oak Ridge Estates Police Substation, the mood was a mixture of professional duty and barely contained amusement. Law enforcement had long been the unwilling arbiters of HOA-related conflicts, but this case was different. This was systemic harassment captured with scientific precision. Elaine Rafferty, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the developing situation. She'd taken the day off work, spending her morning doing laps in the very pool that had become the epicenter of neighborhood tension. The water was cool, her movements deliberate, each stroke a silent victory lap against Linda's bureaucratic warfare. Her phone rang. It was Tom Henderson, the HOA board president, his voice a mixture of panic and reluctant admiration. "Ms. Rafferty," he began, "we may have a situation." The situation, as it turned out, was far more complex than a simple pool violation. Linda's overzealous documentation had not only exposed her own repeated trespassing, but had also revealed a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond Elaine's property. Detective Chen pulled up additional records. 3 other homeowners had previously filed complaint reports about Linda's aggressive behavior, but each time the incidents had been dismissed as minor disputes. Now, with digital evidence and a comprehensive paper trail, the picture was becoming clear. "This isn't just about a pool," Chen remarked to Rodriguez. "This is about power, control." The neighborhood watched and waited. Oak Ridge Estates had always been a carefully controlled environment. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, unspoken rules that everyone followed. Linda Pembroke had been the enforcer of those unspoken rules, the self-appointed guardian of suburban conformity. But every system has its breaking point. Officer Rodriguez made a call. A warrant would be necessary, not for Elaine Rafferty and her supposedly problematic pool, but for Linda Pembroke and her documented pattern of harassment. In the perfectly maintained living room of Linda's meticulously organized home, her world was about to collapse. The same administrative precision she used to terrorize her neighbors would now be the instrument of her downfall. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is an overconfident bureaucrat with a laser pointer and too much free time. The knock on Linda Pembroke's door came at 9:17 a.m., sharp enough to rattle the precisely hung wind chimes that had never once been out of alignment. 2 police officers stood on her immaculate front porch, the kind of porch that had won Best Landscape Entrance 3 years running. Officer Rodriguez's hand rested casually near his badge, while Detective Chen's eyes swept the perfectly maintained foyer as Linda's perfectly pressed exterior began to crack. "Mrs. Pembroke," Rodriguez began, his voice professional but carrying an undertone of something Linda couldn't quite place. Was it amusement? Contempt? "We'd like to discuss some matters related to your recent complaints and documented actions." Linda's world had always been about control. Spreadsheets, bylaws, precise measurements. Her entire existence was a carefully calibrated machine of administrative perfection. Now that machine was grinding to a spectacular halt. The living room became a battlefield of bureaucratic tension. Chen spread out printed screenshots, timestamped surveillance footage, and a series of complaint reports that told a story far different from the one Linda had been crafting. Each document was a knife, slowly dissecting her carefully constructed persona. "Do you recognize these?" Chen asked, sliding forward a series of photographs showing Linda on Elaine Rafferty's property, laser pointer in hand, measuring and documenting without consent. Linda's perfectly applied makeup began to show the first hints of stress, a tiny crack of foundation near her left cheekbone, a bead of sweat threatening to destroy years of carefully maintained composure. "I was simply performing my duties as a concerned homeowner," she stammered, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Multiple homeowners have filed complaints about your behavior, repeated trespassing, harassment, unauthorized surveillance." The word unauthorized hung in the air like a guillotine blade. What Linda didn't understand, what she had never understood, was that power wasn't about following rules. It was about understanding them, respecting them. Her entire existence had been about weaponizing bureaucracy, turning neighborhood regulations into a personal fiefdom of control. Elaine Rafferty had been preparing for this moment her entire professional life, a corporate lawyer who understood that true power wasn't about aggression, but strategy. While Linda had been measuring pool distances and tracking mailbox paint colors, Elaine had been building a case. A case that was now coming to fruition. Detective Chen's voice cut through Linda's racing thoughts. "We'll need you to come down to the station to discuss these matters further." Outside, the neighborhood watched. Blinds twitched, garage doors opened slightly. The Hendersons watered their lawn with surgical precision, missing nothing. Oak Ridge Estates was about to witness the fall of its most notorious administrative tyrant. The wind chimes continued to sound, a delicate, mocking melody accompanying Linda's slow walk towards the police cruiser. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center had never felt so charged with electricity. What should have been a routine HOA board meeting had transformed into something far more dramatic, a public reckoning. Tom Henderson sat at the head of the table, his usual bureaucratic beige demeanor now tinged with a mixture of embarrassment and reluctant admiration. The empty chair where Linda Pembroke would typically sit screamed volumes louder than any complaint she ever filed. "As per the recommendations of local law enforcement," Tom began, his voice wavering slightly, we will be conducting a comprehensive review of our neighborhood bylaws and enforcement procedures. Elaine Rafferty sat near the back, her pool blue notebook open, a subtle reminder of the conflict that had started this entire cascade of events. Around her, neighbors who had previously cowered under Linda's administrative tyranny now whispered and exchanged knowing glances. The digital projector flickered to life, displaying a series of documents that told a story of systematic harassment. Screenshots of Linda's trespassing, detailed logs of repeated violations. Each page was a nail in the coffin of her once unassailable reputation. We've discovered, Tom continued, clearing his throat, that Ms. Pembroke's enforcement actions were not only excessive but potentially criminal in nature. Margaret Simpson, who lived 2 doors down from Linda, leaned over to her husband. "I always knew that woman was one complaint away from a complete meltdown," she whispered, a lifetime of suppressed neighborhood frustration finally finding voice. The meeting became a dissection of Linda's administrative reign. Years of micromanagement, petty enforcement, and borderline harassment were laid bare. Her meticulously maintained spreadsheets, once weapons of neighborhood control, now served as evidence of her own dysfunction. Elaine had prepared for this moment with the precision of a corporate lawyer. Each document, each piece of evidence was carefully curated. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about challenging a system of suburban tyranny that had gone unchecked for years. Moving forward, Tom announced, his voice gaining strength, "We will implement a new complaint review process. Any enforcement action must be approved by a 3-person committee with clear documentation and reasonable cause." The subtext was clear. The Linda Pembroke era was over. Outside, the neighborhood felt different. Garage doors seemed to open a little wider. Conversations on front lawns became more relaxed. The invisible weight of constant surveillance had been lifted. Elaine's pool, the catalyst for this entire conflict, represented more than just a backyard water feature. It was a symbol of resistance, a declaration that not every rule deserved blind obedience, that community should be about connection, not control. As the meeting concluded, whispers of change rippled through the room. Oak Ridge Estates was evolving, and it all started with a 12-foot round pool, a laser pointer, and one homeowner who refused to be bullied. 6 weeks after Linda Pembroke's administrative empire collapsed, Oak Ridge Estates had transformed. The neighborhood that once operated like a tightly controlled military installation now felt more like a community. Elaine Rafferty's pool had become an unexpected symbol of rebellion. Weekend barbecues now happened poolside, with neighbors who had previously only exchanged stiff nods now sharing drinks and laughter. The blue water reflected more than just sunlight. It reflected a newfound sense of freedom. But Linda wasn't finished. Her legal response came in a manila envelope so precisely addressed it could have been drafted by a machine. The return address was a downtown law office specializing in administrative disputes, her last-ditch effort to reclaim some semblance of her former power. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of bureaucratic desperation. She claimed emotional distress, property devaluation, violation of community standards. Each paragraph was a testament to her inability to accept defeat, a final act of administrative warfare. What Linda didn't realize was that her lawsuit would become her ultimate undoing. Detective Chen had been monitoring the situation, her professional interest now tinged with a personal satisfaction. The digital trail Linda had created, years of meticulously documented harassment, trespassing, and administrative overreach, was about to become her final downfall. Tom Henderson, the HOA board president, sat in his home office surrounded by decades of neighborhood records. The investigation had revealed more than just Linda's recent actions. A pattern emerged, a systematic approach of control that had intimidated homeowners for years. "It goes back further than we thought," he muttered, spreading out old complaint files. Elaine received a call, the kind of call that changes everything. "Ms. Rafferty, the voice of the city attorney began, we'd like to discuss a potential countersuit." The pool party that weekend became something of a neighborhood legend. Residents who had once lived in silent fear now shared stories of Linda's past infractions. Each tale was another brick removed from the wall of fear she had constructed. Margaret Simpson, who had always been quietly observing, revealed documents she kept hidden for years, complaints that had been mysteriously lost when Linda was at the height of her power, neighborhood secrets that were now seeing the light of day. The pool became more than just a recreational feature. It was a symbol of resistance, of community, of standing up to bureaucratic tyranny. As the sun set on Oak Ridge Estates, something fundamental had changed. The carefully maintained facades now held something new, a sense of genuine connection. A people who had discovered that true community wasn't about following rules, but about supporting each other. Linda's lawsuit was about to become her final mistake, and Elaine Rafferty was prepared to make sure of it.